He was honest. In his cartoons, you knew where he stood.
He didn't like sleazy people.
He wouldn't let people get away with anything. People were astonished when they got to know Herb Bloch because they assumed from the drawings that they'd seen that he was this vicious, opinionated, acerbic, hard-hitting, hell-raising kind of a guy. And instead, you meet this sweet, kindly, gentle soul, and people would say, no, he's not the guy who does those drawings, can't be.
For Herbert Lawrence Bloch, the youngest son of David and Tessie Bloch, summers in Chicago were as sweet and gentle as his childhood.
There was a lot of feeling in the family that they should not only take care of each other, but take care of other people who couldn't take care of themselves. Strong sense of family, strong sense of community, and a strong sense of country.
The smell of his mother's homemade cakes and breads filled their home on Plum Street. His father was a well-known chemist, but after work, he loved to talk politics. A one-time reporter, he walked his sons all over town, encouraging them to look hard at the world around them. Herb drew what he saw in chalk on the sidewalk until his parents set him up at the kitchen table. If he could see it, he could draw it. The youngest in his class at the Chicago Art Institute, Herb drew faces from the news, adding captions and comments. His cartoons got him a weekly column in his high school paper. He said, "I had no trouble expressing my ideas, and by 19, I had drawn my way into becoming a journalist." "Keep 'em coming, kid," said the Chicago Daily News. 4 years later, he was hired by a national syndicate, and in 1933, all of America could read Herb Bloch. He prodded his readers to think about the problems facing them at home and abroad. His views on the war unnerved his conservative bosses and won him his first Pulitzer Prize. "I was never out of a job," he said, "but I knew more and more Americans were." The Depression grew worse, he said. "I watched as FDR and his New Deal tried to do something about it. It taught me that government can and must do the things that need to be done. To take up the well-being of the little guy, to speak the truth on his behalf." And from that fight, his pencil never strayed. In 1945, he was invited to lunch in Washington. A third-rate newspaper had just been bought by a gutsy new publisher. He wanted the prize-winning cartoonist to help him put the paper on the map. Herb insisted on editorial independence and the right to choose his own topics. The deal was struck, and Herb was ready to draw it as he saw it.
He was very serious about doing his homework and making sure that he had absolutely every fact down. Herb devoured everything. He would be in there at all hours, devouring stuff. He'd also comb and shred newspapers during the day to pick out little things that sometimes went into his work and sometimes just went into another messy pile on his desk.
He was the absolute antithesis of neatness. It looked like a hurricane had gone through that room.
I'll bet you there were newspapers in there from World War I.
And on one wall, there was a floor-to-ceiling stack of newspapers. And the first time I saw it, I said, "Herb, what in the world is that wall of newsprint doing?" And he said, "Well, you never know when you might have to look something up."
He would try to find out facts and find out who did what. There was a certain churning that would go on after these questions and visits with people. But then he would go into a kind of a silent mode there in late afternoon, where obviously something was happening inside his head. Then bingo, out would come these sketches. And he would do 2 or 3 or sometimes 5 sketches in a day, which he would run around showing to certain people, and I happened to be lucky enough to be on that circuit. And he'd sometimes ask opinions, but he didn't let them color his own too much because he was fiercely independent. He was a man who did not come to our editorial meetings and wasn't required to, because his cartoon was his opinion and not the opinion of the newspaper.
His style, his drawing style, was slightly comic. He drew large. He's going to get you with a dagger here, a dagger there, a dagger there.
That's where you get the hard universal truths down the gullet, is by blending them with this rich, warm, good humor.
With Herb, nothing was an issue. It was more a deep-seated wrong that needed righting, because he felt strongly that people should be called to task if they were screwing around with the country in some way or another. And took his responsibility for saying so out loud and strong as he could as being a major responsibility. Herb was an absolute patriot. I mean, he really believed in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Herb said, the Founding Fathers worked out how the government should operate. A free press was set up for thoroughly practical reasons, to serve as a critic of government. In our system of checks and balances, the press provides the outside check.
That's the role of journalists, is to keep looking, keep investigating, and find out if what is being advertised is really true.
It's not enough that you can draw pictures and make these kind of one-sentence commentaries. Is that you have to have a deep understanding, a journalistic understanding about the lay of the land of politics. He was speaking on behalf of millions of people who felt the exact same way. And I think the power and the magic that people sometimes get from cartoons is that they feel, there is somebody who's saying, speaking truth to power on my behalf. Thank you very much.
His lie detector was extremely sensitive, and he would just nail people.
The root of his power and influence and his maybe place in history is the fact that he operated here in Washington, D.C.
Part of Herb's genius was in foreseeing things that others couldn't see or didn't dare see or might not be licensed to see. For example, there was the cartoon of footsteps during Watergate leading right through the White House lawn and up to the door. Now, that one made a few of us in the newsroom blanch, including, I think, some of the powers that be, but who were brave enough to let him do his thing. as we don't have the evidence of that yet. It's not clear. And he just saw it that way and then put it that way.
Did you see Block this morning? Holy.
With each cartoon, he dug deeper into the Nixon White House, distilling the truth into his 4x6-inch column on the editorial page. His investigative work on Watergate, alongside Woodward and Bernstein and Roger Wilkins, jolted the country into action and won him the third of his 4 Pulitzer Prizes.
There's that core of just anger and outrage and passion that says, this is the way this country needs to operate, and I'm going to do my damnedest to get us there. It was the daily possibility of getting up and doing that cartoon and affecting public life.
He cared about poverty.
Civil rights, racism, equality.
He deeply believed that racism was more than just a social problem. It was a weakness of the United States. It was hurting the whole country.
Reagan was president, and this shows Reagan showing a black guy his photo album of Reagan with black kids at a school and Reagan talking to a black grown-up, and he's showing them. And the black guy is looking Reagan in the face with astonishment, and he's got a whole bunch of graphs. Aid to public schools, down. Housing for the poor, down. School lunches, down. Unemployment, up. Job programs, down. Food stamps, down.
He would celebrate his inspired moments with a flashing light on a helmet hat he had, and he'd come in with the thing flashing and pop his head in and say, "I have an idea."
He lived his life with a kind of boyish delight, whether at the office or his adored beach house. A place, he said, where the sea air blew the cobwebs out of your head, and he could leave thoughts of Washington's scoundrels behind.
When he went to the White House with a bunch of us to receive the Medal of Freedom from President Clinton, Herb the prankster suddenly emerged after the ceremony. When he suddenly approached us, his head whipped around, and in place of his eyes, he had 2 miniature cream puffs from the White House food table. I said, "Hello."
You look back over the history of his drawings, he was right a huge percentage of the time. You know, he created a record.
He did not care what some of the people thought, including the biggest powers of all, and so he was able to just conduct himself without worrying about anybody.
He understood how important it was for the press to have an impact on America.
One of the most influential journalists of the 20th century, Herb liked to say, "There are no wonder men or women. There are only you and I and others who believe in democracy. Think about the other guy and do something about it."
We spent a lot of time laughing on Mrs. Graham's dime, I must say.
I remember one time he got in a gorilla suit and snuck up behind Meg Greenfield, who was then the editor of the editorial page. I thought she was going to fly through the wall to the elevator.